wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
It's better not awaken anything in me.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
I'm responsible for my own happiness. I can't even be responsible for my own breakfast.
We have Santa Claus. Assemble.
We are so lucky to have a guest joining us on today's episode of the show. He is a teacher at Shimer Great Book School in North Central College and the author of several books, including Neoliberalism's Demons, on the political theology of late capital, and on what is theology, Christian thought, and contemporary life. But his latest book veers into the world of pop culture and cinema studies. It is Late Star Trek, the final frontier of the franchise era. Adam Kotsko, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Could I ask, so we're going to get into Star Trek, I imagine pretty deeply here in a second, but before we do, I would just love to get a sense of your own journey. What brought you to late Trek specifically as an era that you wanted to look at, and what made you want to look at it in such a well-defined way?
Yeah, Star Trek's been part of my life since I was a kid. One of my earliest memories is, watching the original series with my dad, and watching Next Generation when I was a teenager was a treasured ritual on the weekend. I kind of left it aside for most of my young adult life. But then my girlfriend and I were kind of casting about for a show to watch, and she suggested, well, why don't we watch Star Trek The Next Generation? I always enjoyed that as a kid. And then it was just like the floodgates were open, we wound up watching all the series, and I even became involved in some fan discussion groups because in the meantime I had gone to grad school, and so I approach everything as somebody who's gone to grad school and tend to analyze it. And so I think what got me really into this era of Star Trek was just I have a bit of a contrarian streak. Like whenever there's a firm fan consensus, I wonder, is that really right? And one thing I noticed is that fans seem to really, really, really hate Enterprise, which was the short-lived prequel series of Star Trek that starred Scott Bakula as the captain. And, watching it, I was just like, yeah, it's not great, but it's not that much worse than anything else. Like, why are you so obsessed with this? Why do you want it? And similarly, too, there was a lot of controversy around Discovery, and I was kind of more positive until everybody else was positive, then I was more negative. And so
You fell off.
basically that's where my investment in this era comes from, is just from arguing with people about it.
Well, listen, I was so excited when I got a chance to get a hold of the book and to dive into it because I was born in 1991, and my dad is a huge Star Trek fan. He always talks about the original series. He had I assume it must have been like an encyclopedia book, sort of like those DK hardcovers that you can get about different genres. But he had a book that I guess had entries on every single episode of original series. And so he can sort of summon up those episodes pretty easily for you and tell you everything that happened. So he was such a diehard Trek fan growing up. And so when I was a kid and when Enterprise started up, he was like, oh, we're watching this big time. And I think I just sort of took it in as like, oh, this is just a thing you're supposed to like, right? Like this will just be my Star Trek the way original series is for my dad. And I never really I don't know if I had a quality filter there at all. I was just like, oh, this is just the show. I'm watching the show. Okay. And reading. So I was excited to actually get scholarly thought about Enterprise. So like you say, there's not that much consideration given to it out there. Your book was really the first time that I took a step back and was like, oh, Enterprise was a dark ass show about some pretty unsettling topics and approached a lot of that stuff in a very aggro way, unusual for Roddenberry's, sort of like post-war, post-want utopia. What stood out to you about Enterprise when you were going back to examine it through this critical lens? Yeah,
I think that what's interesting is that, as the infamous theme song says, it's about getting, the road from there to here.
It's a long road getting from there to here, Adam.
And I think that theme song, let's just pause and think about the theme song, because it's just so jarring to a Star Trek fan to suddenly have this like Rod Stewart song like
Yep.
playing instead of the
Yeah.
orchestral. And I'm sure that if they issued a
With that weird sort of
remastered,
blue tint on all those historical photos.
oh yeah,
I'm so obsessed with the opening credits of this show. You have no idea.
yeah, it's I think that if they just reissued it with an orchestral score instead of that song, the popularity would just skyrocket. But I think that they had to, they didn't do as good a job as they could have, but they were trying to say, okay, what if everything isn't already taken for granted? What if this world, this utopia isn't already established and we're just in the early stages and nobody knows that's what's going to happen either. Nobody knows that this is our destiny to, found this intergalactic superstate.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that like they make really dumb mistakes. They get into like real danger in a way that the other ships maybe don't, because not everything works yet. They don't even have like the energy shielding, like all of the kind of stuff that you take for granted. They don't have. Nobody knows who or cares who they are. They don't have the heft of this whole organization behind them. And then, on top of that, like inherent kind of precarity of the concept. Then in the third season, they introduced this like terrorism arc to try to turn it into like 24 in space. And it goes in some pretty dark directions. Like Captain Archer has to like strand this like ship, years away from their home, and they clone and then kill one of the crew members. Like it's pretty harsh.
It is, and it's such a product of its time, and that time was psychically so harsh. I feel like in entertainment and just in living in the world. It was very, very interesting for me to think back and go through, you list off in the Enterprise chapter, you're sort of taking the reader through the plot of that show. And, I had in my mind certainly like, oh yeah, there's that season finale of Enterprise where there's the terrorist attack that blows up a huge portion of Florida. But I had never like re-examined that critically as an adult, sort of to your point of like realizing how post 9/11 and 24ish, right? Like how Jack Bowery that show sort of became in such a weird way. How did you find that the tones of Enterprise sort of hang over into because certainly most of the book is the streaming Discovery era, right? How did you find that tone sort of stuck onto Star Trek in a way that maybe wasn't anticipated at the time?
Yeah, I think I was really glad to talk to you when when we corresponded by email and you said that Enterprise was your first Star Trek,
Yeah.
and I like had a hypothetical fan who started with Enterprise and then just kept going, and I concluded that they would think that Star Trek is a show about terrorism.
Yeah.
That like every single show, including up to a very late date, includes a lot of terrorist themes. Like basically all three of the J.J. Abrams films, the last one of which was in 2016, so that's like long after the War on Terror is like a going concern, and just kind of this obsessive focus. And I think that does grow out of Enterprise and out of the bid for kind of the contemporary relevance of like we can do these dark themes. But I think that Enterprise also sets up another dynamic, because like season 3 is the 24 season. And then season 4, they suddenly lurch into this bizarre like series of like fan service, like tie-in things relating especially to the original series. And I think that this dynamic gets set up too, where they want to go hard and they want to like say, this isn't your father's Star Trek. And then after that is poorly received, or after they feel bad about it or something, and then they have to like lurch to this other direction and say, oh no, this is your father's Star Trek. See, we're doing all this fun fan service. And like, you can really map like the back and forth of a lot of this stuff.
And that totally makes sense. We should maybe take a step backwards. I was just so excited to talk to somebody else about Enterprise, a show that has had to be just my dark secret for so long. But your book examines sort of the later era of Star Trek, from Enterprise through to right now, up through the shows that are on Paramount Plus that people can check out, Discovery and Brave New Worlds, and I guess they canceled Below Decks, didn't they?
Yeah, Lower Decks was just
Lower
ended a couple months ago. But
Decks.
um,
but and it sort of looks at all of that through a really particular lens that I found really to be very interesting and to align pretty strongly with stuff we talk about on this show routinely, which is you're looking at it through this lens of late Trek, which you describe as being like similar to late capitalism in like in a world where, or a lens that examines critically how much this stuff has sort of folded back in on itself in a way. Can you sort of what's the high level view that you take away of like where Star Trek is right now? And I imagine it's not just a Star Trek thing, right? This probably shows up in all corners of popular culture right now. Any story that's been told for that long eventually starts to fold in a similar way, I would guess.
Right. Yeah, I think that Star Trek is kind of the first like entertainment franchise in a way, and certainly the most enduring, but also in many ways like the most intellectually ambitious, the one with kind of the most robust fan culture. And so I didn't want to just analyze Star Trek. I was trying to use it as an example of just how franchise storytelling tends to go. And I think that the late Star Trek framing compared to late capitalism, like late capitalism, just to summarize, like the way I use it in the book, is the sense that capitalism is reaching full saturation. Like everything about life is capitalist. You don't have friends, you network. You don't like relax, you have self-care. Like that everything is just kind of like directly purposed for some form of like productivity, and there's
We're
no
optimizing
outside.
life. We're not just
Optimizing your life.
Yeah.
And the parallel with Star Trek would be that Star Trek becomes just a pure commodity that's just turned out solely to make money, solely to take advantage of the fans who feel like they're on board for whatever. The completists like me who have to just pay their monthly Star Trek tax to Paramount Plus.
Yep.
And
I started watching Survivor to justify having that subscription. I was like, I gotta check out something else that's on this platform probably.
Yeah, Evil is pretty good if you're looking for something else to watch.
Okay.
On there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's by the Good Wife people. So I think that in both cases, the attempt to like reach full saturation never really happens. Like even the most sociopathic, like businessy person is not like fully like assimilated to capitalism. They still do have some real life. And I think that one thing I try to trace is like, even though corporate meddling becomes like much, much more prominent and much more distorting of storytelling in this era, that there's still this kernel of like the optimistic Star Trek vision. Like people are still trying to do the thing that makes people like Star Trek. They're not just cynically churning stuff out. And to really take seriously the efforts of these very talented and creative people who are trying to do their best in a situation where there's a lot of obstacles to storytelling and there's a lot of pressure too to keep something going that's very important to people.
And it's interesting, right? Because when you get, for example, into the J.J. Abrams trilogy of films, that's, not creating a new story, right? Discovery and Enterprise both sort of create new ships, not new ships in Enterprise's case, but new missions that then sort of get injected into a really hostile political environment, right? Both Discovery and Enterprise take place among the backdrop of military conflict that the original Roddenberry story, I don't think really imagined existing in much of the universe these days. But with the Abrams stuff, we're going back to the original Kirk, Spock, Uhura crew, but producing it in this late Star Trek era, right? Not when it's something that CBS is willing to take a flyer on because of Lucille Ball, but in an era when, we're making these huge $100 million movies that we're hoping to make billions of dollars. We're hiring a prestigious director. We're casting huge stars. That sort of pressure, I would imagine, just on itself changes what sort of story you're allowed to tell in that space, right? And having that business apparatus built up around it, I would imagine morphs it really quickly. And that's something that I think you sort of see across the stories.
Yeah, definitely. I think that in some cases, like the story becomes about managing the IP, managing the intellectual property. Like the first Abrams movie, the plot of the movie is to explain how it's a new timeline and that you should accept that we don't have to be bound by the past canon and stuff like that. And then the second one even like doubles down on that too by saying, you know, we're taking the greatest villain, but he's meeting them at the wrong time, and he suddenly goes from being
he's sort of not the bad guy a little bit. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so it's just like I would say that only the third one even really attempts a very original story that's really in the spirit of Star Trek.
Right. Yes.
And I mean, I enjoy that one the most. I think it was probably like the biggest critical success, but it wasn't a very big commercial success. Like, I think what I keep coming back to in Star Trek is that it's in this kind of weird negative sweet spot of its size. Like, it's not big enough to truly be like a blockbuster property. It doesn't have that wide of appeal to really do that, but it's so big that the corporate people can be like, couldn't we push it to this level?
Well, it's interesting because sorry, I just want to make a note here really quick because I really want to make sure we talk about the books, but we're just chatting Star Trek now, and I want to continue just chatting Star Trek. It's considering I run a website about nerd entertainment culture, Adam, you'd be shocked how little I get to talk about Star Trek in my life. It's always something else. So this is fun. It's the one thing I always remember too when I think back on it is like Discovery was not just the first Paramount Plus streaming show, right, which was a big thing on its own, but it was sort of the first network exclusive streaming show. Because I remember at the time, even being a big Trek fan, and certainly I signed up for what was at the time CBS All Access so that I could watch Discovery. But I remember thinking, like, I don't know if people are going to be willing to make this bet. Like, I don't know how many people are going to be willing to sign up, take the IP out of it, just for an app for one specific show. You know, that was sort of when we were still doing everything was on Netflix. That was before everybody had retreated to their own independent app corners. Just always kind of weird to me, to your exact point about what Trek's like market cap is. It's always weird to me that CBS was willing to like, we're going to start a streaming movement and we're going to use Michael Burnham to do it. Like that, it's a little incongruous to me, but I, you know, in some ways it is the biggest IP that they have, certainly the most prestigious, as you say, the longest running. But it is this weird, like when you find folks like us who like Star Trek, they really love Star Trek, but it is not Star Wars in its appeal, right?
Definitely. Yeah, I think that the closest that they've come to that level of appeal is Strange New Worlds, which they did run on the network during the writer's strike. But it's basically an homage to original series, so it's much more accessible in terms of being episodic and having like these clear moral lessons and political allegories. And but still, I think that they should just let it out of containment and just put it on CBS. But they just put it on CBS. Really committed to this streaming bit.
Well, and yeah, and that I will never understand. You made a really good point somewhere in the book. That it made sense to me, and I'd never thought about it this way before. But even the fact that like Next Generation and original series are both locked into Paramount Plus, like those seem like they should be the things that are out there on your Hulus or your Netflixes of the world to sort of let people become fans. So then they're willing to, as you say, right, like pay their Star Trek tax every month so that they can check out Discovery or Lower Decks or Strange New Worlds, some of the newer stuff that they've been doing. I didn't watch Sector 33. You don't cover Sector 33 in the book, Adam. Is it as bad as I've heard?
It is.
It is
the absolute worst thing Star Trek has ever produced.
That's disappointing.
I was so shocked. I came in with very poor expectations. You know, it's based on concept of Section 31, which is the like clandestine ops kind of organization. And so but the disappointment is it doesn't even really dwell on that theme. Like it doesn't even do its dumb idea. Like it doesn't even achieve the stupid thing they set out to achieve. It's just so bad. The tone is off. The pacing is off. The characterization is just nonsense. I think that they should simply destroy every hard drive that has it.
Just bury it with the ET video games.
Yes.
It's an interesting problem to have, right? Because we are in a time of such Star Trek boom. Like there is so much content out there, right? I did not super get into Picard, but I know that people really, really loved Picard. This is byproduct of the weird relationship I have with Star Trek, Adam, is since my dad was an original series guy and I was an Enterprise guy, I sort of have a vacuum of Next Generation in my life. Like, it's the one I don't really remember, despite the fact that it's clearly everybody else's touchstone for the whole franchise. But so Picard, I was fine with. It would just, I knew it wasn't made for me. But I wanted to mention it because I keep forgetting it, but Picard included, there are just so many. It's like no matter what kind of Star Trek person you are right now, there is something for you in the marketplace. And your book discusses a time when that was really not the case, right? Which is when the novels and the comic books really came to the front, because if you wanted new Trek, that was where you were going to have to go, right? Was into the written word. Can you talk just a little bit about how that era, which I think again exists in all IPs? I was just talking to somebody the other day about when Star Wars was going through that, and it was, sort of in the 90s before the prequel movies came out. It was the same thing. Like if you wanted new Star Wars, you had to go read the Thrawn novels or whatever. Can you just let us know a little bit what that era did, both for the fans and for the creators of Star Trek, that it kind of went through that period, how things changed in there?
Yeah, I think that it introduced kind of new styles of storytelling into Star Trek. Other than Deep Space Nine, all the series have been pretty episodic. And then once they kind of came to their natural end, and then the 2000s, there just wasn't any new productions set in the period immediately following Next Generation. So the authors developed this idea of, what if we started altering the status quo? What if we gave ourselves the freedom to like move this story forward in a serious way, and to develop some of the politics of the Federation and like all this kind of stuff, and just it created this sprawling, huge continuity of probably hundreds of novels, or at least dozens, and that reshuffled the characters, had major wars, like the Borg were, started a war against the Federation and then were like defeated, and then like the bad guy races all just like bound together to become like an anti-Federation, like all kinds of stuff like that happened. And I think it certainly reached a point of diminishing returns, because you'd have to have this backlog of like this vast knowledge of like dozens of novels before to really get into the new ones. But I think it accustomed people to the idea that Star Trek could be something with more continuous plots, that it could have more kind of overarching stories on a larger scale than it ever had before. And I think that's really interesting, because like in the past eras, the novels did deepen the franchise, and I think they did kind of set the tone for a lot of key concepts in the franchise in a way that the shows didn't. Like, I think that the novels were more influential for how people see the Klingons than the 3 episodes of the original series that featured the Klingons. Like, isn't that shocking to think there's only 3 episodes?
Trouble with Tribbles. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And one of them is like a comedy episode. Like, it just like the amount that people are fascinated by Klingons is hugely disproportionate compared to the show. And it's the novels, I think, that created that. And so, like, I think that in a way, those type of written, like, like a second level of fandom, like that you have like a built-in commitment, and that weirdly allows you to take more risks. I think it allows you to take big moves, because you just like, well, I've got an audience that is invested in this and that cares that I'm making this big move. And I think that it's a shame that they basically deleted all that material by launching Picard in such a way that like basically nothing from the novels could stand anymore. They like within the first 2 minutes of the show, you're like, oh, okay, nope, that's gone too. Okay.
It's also so interesting in terms of, if you're a publishing group and you say, okay, we have to put out 2 Star Trek novels, and you sort of already have that on your slate. Then when an author comes to you with an interesting idea for a Star Trek novel, you're open to doing it, right? Because you've got the resources sort of already allocated to that project. Then, however, when you get into a world of your Abrams movies, your Prestige reboot series, trying to figure out what the future of this thing looks like, even if the content of the material isn't there anymore. What is there, what you've sort of read about your fans, about your audience, is that they want to know how the things piece together, right? Like there is an interest in knowing more than what you've given before. Maybe showing more about how the politics work, or explaining more complex intricacies behind some of the bureaucratic systems and things like that. What I am really curious about, though, is like what the thing that I think I get really frustrated about with Star Trek is how often I really love original series, and I sort of pine for that, and want them to go back to sort of doing more cool, fun space adventure stuff, right? And that seems so. I mean, Strange New Worlds is certainly kind of trying to go back to that well in a way, but they've seemed so resistant to that for so long. Like, it seems like it's been more and more in the direction of, well, let's drill down on this, let's explain how this works, let's move in a new direction rather than just continuing to do the thing that we know people like. Which I also get. You want to innovate, you want to do new stuff, you want to do novel things, but it exhausts me sometimes, I think. I don't know if there's a question attached to that. It's one of the things that I feel like haunts me all the time about this franchise.
Yeah, I think that basically for the last 25 years, Star Trek has been running away from Star Trek. Like, the producers have been feeling like the property that they're supposedly developing is like an albatross around their neck.
100%.
And the people who like Star Trek are like a burden because they're only just going to make the storytelling more constricted or something like that. And it's really only with Strange New Worlds that they finally just said, okay, we're just going to do the thing. And that's one of the few shows that's actually drawn in broader audiences too. Like, their stated goal all along was, we're going to reach new audiences by doing Star Trek differently. And only when they did the thing did it really work. I think that just goes to show you, like, contemporary business practices. Like, the assumption is always like, anybody who's already here must be an idiot. Like, so that's why we got to bring in a consultant, or we got to like bring in tourists. We got to, like, it can't be, you can't just do the thing. You have to always be like innovating, always in the same way as everybody else too.
Right. Well, this again goes back to your late capitalism sort of overarching point, right? And how, now we have to moneyball Star Trek, right? We can't just like make a interesting Star Trek show. Okay, we are winding down a little bit here. I want to be conscientious of your time because I, as I say, would literally just sit here and talk to you about Star Trek all day. So an interesting thing happened to me recently, and it seems like the appropriate way for us to wrap things up here, Adam, which is, after 9 years of being married and most of my lifetime of actually knowing my wife, she asked if we could watch Star Trek, which is not a property that she has shown any interest in before. I forced her to watch the Kirk and Spock movies when Abrams was doing his thing. And she has definitely seen a couple episodes here and there, but we've never sat down and watched Star Trek. And she said she wanted to do it. And I said, you mean like original series? And she said, all of it. We should watch all of it.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, this is an impressive commitment. We'll see if you stick with it, right? I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen at this point, but with the universe of things open to us, I kind of wonder, especially after your late Trek assessment, where do you recommend a newcomer to the world of Star Trek begin their journey? Do you think that it's a chronological thing? Do you think it's just do it in the production order? How do you recommend people kind of come to Star Trek these days?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question.
So here's sort of, and I'll give you time to think. Here's kind of the versions of the solution that I came up with. I was option one, we just start with original series. I can just say, here's what it is. I think it is sort of, for my money, the most enjoyable, even if it's not the best, because it's always just episode to episode. You're just doing something new, right? So it's like, if this one stinks, next one might be good. Who knows? So I think it's start with original series. That's option one. I think option two is start with Discovery and kind of go, or Enterprise, I suppose, and go kind of in the universe order, which might modernize it a little bit. It might be a little bit more accessible for current audiences to kind of like put on a show that has a recognizable amount of production value behind it, right? Like I get so much joy out of the sets of original series, but I recognize that that's not an aesthetic that everybody looks at and goes, oh, this is going to be a good TV show. And then the last one I thought was just do the movies, right? Because that's sort of a quicker pop. You sort of get the palette of what's happening, and then we can sort of circle up afterwards, and she can be like, oh, I really liked Next Generation. Let's do the Next Generation series first and go from there. So those are kind of the three ways I had thought to come at the question, but I haven't made up my mind yet. And so the result is we're just watching original series while I think about it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to do production order. I mean, the thing with Star Trek is that if you're going to be watching it, you're going to be rewatching it basically your whole life.
Yeah.
And like we did a rewatch, like show by show. We did like Next Generation, then we did Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and then, but of course they overlapped when they aired. And so I actually wrote out a course of study that would be the in-universe order. It's on my Substack, also entitled Late Star Trek. I can email that to you if you're interested in that.
Absolutely. I'm interested in that. And we'll make sure to link your Substack in the episode description here so anybody else who is can find it as well.
I think that you could also, like, Next Generation seems like the most watchable overall. It seems to have the broadest appeal, but the first two seasons rather are very rough.
Or a little, tough. Like you said, you talk about growing the beard in the book, but
yes.
Yeah, right. You've got to get through that kind of era.
I would say a good strategy would be just like scan through the IMDb page and like hit the highlights, like the higher rated version, like episodes from the first two series, and then really start watching it straight through in season 3 to the end. Season 3 is when it really hits its stride. And like 3, 4, and 5, I've just been rewatching. I have like such an intimate like grasp of these nuances right now. Like seasons 3, 4, and 5, like if you don't like that, you simply don't like Star Trek. You don't like it's got like such a high density of some of the best episodes ever, and even the mediocre episodes are still a joy. So I would say like that era, if you're not comfortable just jumping right in at the beginning of season 3, you can hit the highlights by like seeing what the ratings are on IMDb. But yeah, that's where I would start.
That makes sense. I might go that route. Well, the man is Adam Kotsko. The book is Late Star Trek. It was such an enjoyable read for me, and I'm probably going to go through it, I would imagine, at least once more as I go through all these shows. But Adam, thank you so much for the book, because as I said, it really was a treat for me to read, and conversations that I'd always wanted to have with people my whole life I had in my mind while reading your book. And also thank you for your time today coming on the show. We really appreciate having you as a guest.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you.